Are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
I do not have any.
I do not have any.
I'll start out then. We're starting out with the finance reports. I have the treasurer's report here. Are there any questions on the treasurer's report?
Nope.
All right, we'll exit out of that. The budget as of the end of February. Revenue-wise, we are tracking on budget. We've received 49.67% of our revised budget, compared to 47.72 and 48.25. Expense-wise, we are also tracking on budget 53.18, 57.07 to 55.18. So that's good news there. If you want to see the other funds, food service is ahead a little bit on revenue collection with the summer food program, but expense-wise, they are right in the ballpark with the other years. Community education is in line revenue collection-wise with the revised budget, but if you look at prior years, we have taken the revenue budget down about $200,000 from prior years. Expense-wise, their expenses are also tracking in line, but again, we've taken their expense budget down about $200,000 to $300,000 from prior years, just because of they're not running as many classes right now as they have in the past. Are there any questions on the budget? Anything you want me to go into more detail on?
Are we still projected to be about over $1 million in the hole, so to speak, more expenditures than revenue? I see we're $1,090,000 or so right now. Is that the projection still?
That is still the projection, and we are holding true to that projection right now.
Okay.
And that's without the state and without the federal dollars coming in.
Correct. That is without the second round of COVID money and now the third round of COVID money. That is without those federal aids.
And has anybody reached out to you and said, hey, here's when you can expect it?
No. The last projection I heard from the Department of Ed was the week of March 8th, and it has been silent since then.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Nope.
All right. So that is the financial report. For the enrollment update, we'll talk first about our typical enrollment report. We did revise with the revised budget. We revised our enrollment down to 2,544.9. We are currently 9 weighted student counts above our revised budget, which is good news. But we are still gradually losing. If you look February to March, we are down another 2 students.
Yep.
Any questions on that report?
The only thing I won't say, there's nothing wrong with the report, but I got to look at my phone because I can't read whatever you have up there. It's just not big enough.
It's just not big enough? Okay.
All the so far. So I'm just letting you know I'm going to be glancing down my phone so I can see it better. So maybe it's just me, but I think
I can try to bring it up bigger too.
Sure. As we
It
go
is-
forward.
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions either. It is really hard to see, so sometimes I go over to my other one. But then I know it takes up the whole screen and then we can't see certain parts of it when we enlarge it. So I get it.
The next report I have under enrollment is one of a series of reports I've received from Forecast 5. They've just received the 2020 data files from the state of Minnesota. And so they prepare some summary reports for us on our history, both enrollment-wise and finance-wise. So the first one is our enrollment story, which tells where you can look at a history of our enrollment going back to 2007 and how that has changed. You can see just from 2007 to 2020, we are down 200 students in that 13-year time frame. Other data this report has in it that is good for board members is how our race and ethnicity of our students is changing and what is stable. How the economic status or the number of students we have that qualify for free and reduced lunch is changing as well. Again, since from 2007 to 2020. It also has what our class sizes were for last school year, how many we had in each grade. Our average enrollment by grade is 201, which is the orange line on this report. And you can see where we have the bubble classes coming through with a little higher enrollment and where we have some lower enrollment grades coming through the system. This also just shows, based on census data, where the kindergarten enrollment has been based on births in Goodhue County 6 years prior. You can see that it is tracked pretty closely. So we can assume that with this orange line, we'll have pretty steady kindergarten enrollment going forward at somewhere in that 180 to 200 students per class. This just shows which schools have had the largest increases and decreases in the last 3 years, mostly because of those bubble classes, again, moving through the system. And then where the data came from. Are there any questions on that report? I moved through that pretty fast.
I had a question on the race and ethnicity, I think. Yep, race and ethnicity. How come in the 2 or more didn't get recorded until 2017? Do you know why?
I don't know why. It could be that that is the year that the state enrollment form changed to have that as an option.
Okay. And you also mentioned something about a bubble gap or something. Did I say that right?
Bubble class.
A bubble class. What's a bubble class?
So a bubble class is if we have, this is on this screen, if we have pretty steady classes that have about 200 students enrollment, so we staff for say a 7th grade class that has 200 students in it, but then we see next year the next class they have 240 students. So those are the bubble classes. They're the classes that come above the line.
Okay.
So it was last year's 8th graders, so this year's 9th graders. They have a little more in their class than average, and then it looks like we have a 2nd grade class coming through the system as well. So there where we'll maybe have to add a section for that class, and then we'll have to reduce the section the next year because we'll go back to average. Any other questions?
Can you go back to the free and reduced and how that's changed in 13 years? Just give us a little snippet.
So we've gone to where about 21% of our students qualified for free and reduced lunch in 2007. As of 2020, we're at about 33% of our students. We did hit a high in the 14, 15, 16 years where we were pushing 40%. And I would expect that to jump up again here in 2021. It just shows how many of our families are living below the poverty line.
And I know that at 35%, it moves us into another category of financial support. Am I correct?
In certain programs, yes.
Okay, so did we get that in 2014, 2015, and then we lost it?
Yes.
What is that? What is the title of that support?
It's like compensatory revenue. It's like a concentration revenue. I can't remember
Okay.
the title of it.
Right.
Just because your concentration gets so high. And if you hit 40%, 45%, you can have community eligibility for free lunches.
Oh, okay. You can have community eligibility. Okay.
Yep.
So we've dropped that, but you project we're going to go back to it.
I don't know what we're going to be back to, but I think we're going to be a little bit higher, or at least stable. The issue with this year is because lunch was free for all students, we had issues collecting the free and reduced lunch applications to get to know where this number is currently lying.
Okay, which would possibly make sense in a decrease.
Yep.
Okay. How many forms do you think we didn't get? 50%, 20%?
Oh, it's hard to say. I would say it's closer because we did an extra reach out and a lot of extra efforts. I would say it's close to the 15 to 20%.
Okay. Okay. Because I know that there were a couple notices that went out and Brent was trying hard with Karsten to try to get that figured out. And Karsten, you gave it a different name, kind of a neutral name. Benefits or something?
Yeah.
Application for educational benefits.
Application for educational benefits. Okay.
Yeah,
And
also hit 40%, correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, but if we hit 40%, then we could be eligible for school-wide Title I programming, which is a huge benefit because it would give us more flexibility in terms of how we spend our Title I funds.
So included with that community lunch eligibility, we could get school-wide Title I,
Yes.
which could hire more teachers.
We could have more flexibility than in how we use the funds. Right now, they're directed at certain students who meet certain criteria, but we could use them in other ways.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then I just want to make sure I'm reading this right as we're just on this screen right here. Red Wing Public School District enrollment story. Low-income students and English language learners can require additional support. Is that correct? The English language learners can require additional support.
Correct. They can, sometimes when they first come and they don't speak any English, they have pull-out supports.
Okay.
Along.
And I'm having a really hard time why they reached out to the district earlier and we're kind of really not even heard. So that's gonna be put on my back burner from here on out. Thank you.
Any other questions before I close this report?
No, not a question, but Nikki, I really like the way you zoned in on that and the language. Thank you.
All right, the other documents in here, we've looked at the last couple of finance committee meetings with the different reduction scenarios, and we'll look at again tonight. A couple of new documents I did add, I wanted to highlight. One is the MASBO budget survey. So MASBO is the Minnesota Association of School Business Officials. So my counterparts statewide. The legislative committee did a budget survey, and I included the results there. 144 of 333 school districts responded, and 92% said with no formula increase, which is what we're projecting in our budget projection, 92% of them would have to deficit spend in their general fund, with several districts ranging into the millions. And then they have a couple of examples here of different school districts and what they're projecting to either deficit spend or reduce for next school year. Anoka Hennepin, which is the largest district in the state, at 14 million. Deep River Falls and Princeton were more around 2 million. Robbinsdale at 4, and then other regional centers like St. Cloud, Bemidji, and Mankato were at 3, 5, and 7. So we're not alone. That was more of what I wanted to get at with this, is we're not alone at making our decisions for budget reductions. Districts across the state are looking at that right now. So that was in there for your information. The other sentence I wanted to highlight is this one, the first paragraph of the bottom page, kind of going into the second page there. The reality school districts statewide are experiencing and how COVID has exacerbated the situation. According to the Department of Education, 17,000 students withdrew from public schools last fall due to COVID-related concerns. We are also not alone in our enrollment decline.
Were there any out of there, any suggestions on collectively the group is looking at lowering that number?
Lowering which number?
17,000. So you get kids back into school.
Every district I've talked to has been trying to do that, but no one has had a brilliant suggestion yet.
So collectively, the group hasn't, not that I expect them to solve it, but since it's, many of them are, we're not alone as other school districts are feeling the same pinch. Where ours are a little bit different as we have a charter school going in a bigger direction or bigger way than what it has in the past in the next 15 months or 18 months, whatever it is. So, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim, there. As far as I know, there's no statewide effort to address that decline. There is a bill in the legislature to have some one-time financial relief for those with declining enrollments, but really the real story is what are we going to do to get those kids to come back to public schools?
Right.
What are public schools going to do?
Right.
Right.
The other two new reports I have in here are much like the enrollment story, but they're on a financial end. They are also included as extras in the packet for the workshop tonight. And they're comparing Red Wing to what we call like peers across the state. So they're districts who have similar enrollment and similar low income percentages. The districts we're comparing to on this chart here, the blue dots indicate where they are located within the state. The first one shows this is all of the state on average where funds come from. The orange is local sources such as property taxes and fees. The red is state sources and the blue is federal sources. The next slide is just Red Wing Public Schools, where all of our funds come from. You can see our local sources is going up as our property tax referendum kicked in that year. This is also a good graph to see where it shows our revenue expenses are moving in general. They are moving together. And then our fund balance curve here at the bottom. In comparison to our like peers, this is our ending fund balance for 2020. You can see we are down on the lower end of this graph, with the average being the line here. This is not news to us. We've discussed this many times already, how our fund balance policy is lower than many others in the state. This is also a good graph as we look at it. It shows the changes in our teacher FTE versus the changing in our student population. In general, you want to see these lines move together, meaning we are keeping class sizes at our class size ratio, which is good for finance. And you can see from 2015 on, these lines have moved together in the same direction. Prior to 2015, they weren't always moving in the same direction, but they were, students were generally down, but we had some increases and sharper decreases in teachers than we had in students. This is our class size ratio, and when they're talking class size ratio in this sense, they are pulling in everyone on the teacher's contract. So they're pulling in guidance counselors and specials and everybody. And this shows with lifetime districts, our class size ratios are average for 2019, I guess this is, because they didn't have the new STAR data yet. This next one just shows where our expenses have changed over the last few years from 2017 to 2020 and why. The first box is percentage-wise. The second box shows the dollars of that percentage. So you can see visually impaired here at the top had a 17,000% increase. Well, it was only $17,000 in expenses. So that could be we had one visually impaired student move in who needs a one-on-one para. So that's why it's good to look at both the percentages and the dollar amount. The last slide is with our like peers, where are we spending more per student than the average of the other 8 districts? And so we are the orange and the blue is the average.
So you're saying we're spending more per student than the average?
Correct, in these areas.
And could you give us a little description of the areas?
So non-instructional support would be staff that are not working in the classroom. So it would be district office staff, it would be custodians, technology support.
We're spending that much more?
Yes, than average.
Not including the rows beneath that.
Not including the road. It's only in that one category.
Right.
Yeah, it'd be really nice if Forecast 5 could produce like a summary for each one of those categories so that.
Like what we're spending it on?
Yeah, exactly. So that we
Yeah.
don't, try to remember or rely on Jackie for that info.
Okay, I can see if they can
Break
subcategorize.
it down?
And then is that only for the general fund, Jackie, or is that all funds,
I believe that is all funds,
including community education?
including community ed and food service.
Yeah, it'd be also good if Forecast 5 could just focus on the general fund because the other funds really, are unrelated to the instructional, right, the direct instructional program.
Right, so this non-instructional support could be because we run a very robust community ed program.
That could be part of what?
Part of why it's more than average is because we run a very robust community ed program.
More than average across the whole graphing or just one section?
Just one section,
Which would be the non-instructional?
instructional support.
Okay. That could be related to community ed,
Yep,
which we do run a very robust.
correct.
How do we get that number more in line with other districts and keep our robust community ed?
I think that's where we need the breakout first.
Okay. So you'll request breakouts and this is slide 10?
Yes.
Okay. Jackie, request.
I think that shows a lot of info.
Mhm.
Okay.
So that is what they call the economic profile. With like peers. And then there's also a financial story, which shows us with those same like peers, but a couple of different slides. Again, it's those same like peers. This one shows more of our local data and where things are coming from and where they're going. So the first slide shows where our revenue came from for fiscal 2020, mostly from state and local sources. And the next couple slides are different breakouts on where our money is going. So the first one is by program. You can see the big red chunk here, that's elementary and secondary regular instruction. On my screen, at least, it's kind of a tan brown color is special education instruction. The purple is pupil support services, which would include things like transportation and food services, as well as guidance counseling and school psychologist services for gen ed students. And then our pink is sites, buildings, and equipment. This one breaks out student support services into some of the other programs. So things like general instructional support, media centers. You can see in this one, food services, which is the orange, and pupil transportation, which is the blue, are our two biggest pupil support services. This slide shows it broken out into object codes. So what kinds of expenses are we having? The light tan is salaries and wages. The orange is benefits, and the green is purchase services.
What's an example of purchase services?
It can be anything from contracted services, like we contract with Teachers on Call for our substitutes. That is a purchase service. My contract with School Management Services is a purchase service. Our contract with Meridian for Shonda, but it's also things, those are probably the most straightforward purchase services, but it also could be, we contract with the plow company to come and plow our parking lots. We contract with plumbers and electricians to come in and make repairs to our buildings. Those are some other types of purchase services.
So it's basically anything that we purchase that we don't do ourselves.
Correct.
Or anything.
Yeah, our busing is a purchase service.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Do we not have an electrician on staff?
We do, but he can't do all projects.
So he's not a master electrician then?
We hire an electrician to come in.
So is he electrician? Is Scott electrician or master electrician?
He is a master electrician.
Well, they can do anything.
It's more workload wise if we needed extra support that we'd hire an
Gotcha.
electrician. It's not often we do that.
Okay.
Here is that same chart we saw on the last, the economic story, where it shows both the percentages and the dollar impacts of high change areas from 2017 to 2020. This slide shows the red is our expenses, the blue is our revenue, and how close those come in any given year. You can see they've been very close the last few years. Last year we had a surplus of about $2 million, but that was a planned surplus, building up our fund balance. And then our own fund balance history and how that has been changing since 2016. This last slide is what we spend on average compared to these peer districts. We are above the average, which is this orange line, but we are not the most. We're kind of in the middle there. And when they say operating expenses per student, that means it is the general fund, the food service fund, and the community ed fund. But they take out things like equipment purchases and one-time purchases like that. And then the notes on where they come from. Any questions on that report?
No, not right now, but thank you.
Yep, just some data for you guys to have. They update these every year, and I can ask them to break it out maybe in a different way for us. Otherwise, that was all I had for the agenda today, unless you want me to talk more about the scenarios we'll be discussing tonight at the board workshop.
We went through those already, and I'm sure we're going to have a pretty good discussion on them tonight at the workshop. I don't need to hash them again. We'll hash them again in 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, I agree. I don't need to see him again. Nikki, would you like to see him again?
No, but may I ask a question?
Yes.
Because what day is it? Okay, we had the Native American Parent Committee meeting last Wednesday. And so I have in my notes, it says talk to Holly about budget. I think what they were wondering is because we went over the budget on where the money comes from the state grants, but there was no explanation on the federal. So is this a seed I can plant with the finance committee that we could maybe look into the future? They just want to see how it's been spent and what they can do in the future to spend it with. Is just kind of what they're
Sure.
looking at. So, and then I don't know if this falls into this, but looking into a grant writer, that was in my notes as well from that. So I don't know if that falls in the financial or what.
We could make you the grant writer, Nikki.
Oh, geez, no. And if grant writing was approved on video and performance, I think I could nail it. But when it comes to actual writing, I'm not your gal.
Okay.
But yeah, so those were just the two things I think that I needed to ask about pertaining to the Native American Parent Committee.
It's
I
usually
just
a
knew-
team of people.
Yeah, it's in-house.
I did make a note to talk about the revenue and expenses on the Indian Ed grants for a future meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I just know, Nikki, you had mentioned one of the last meetings that you're all over the grant writing, so I thought maybe you'd be the person to go to for that. Just throwing it out there.
I'm actually the person who I'm in grant world. In my world, is I'm the one that gets programs going. It's a great ADHD job because we don't like to factory work, production. That's a good way to kill ADHD spirit. So we like to get things started and then fly on to the next project.
There you go. Well, I know a little about, I did grant writing in my other job, and so it does take a special knack and a desire and time commitment to explore what's out there and write them the right way. And you win some, you lose some. Simple as that.
Any other issues? The last thing on our agenda.
Go for it.
I don't have anything on the finance committee here at all at this point.
No, I'm just really curious to hear what the administrative team has to say, what they're thinking, and then getting that information from, getting the money and where we can plug it in. Those are my kind of thoughts for next steps.
I know that we keep, it's kind of like a glooming. We don't really want to look at the numbers when it comes to the declining enrollment. I know because that is a big money maker for us. But I do, and I know that we're not alone, and the rest of the state is. But I do have faith in Red Wing Public School District that we're going to be the ones to figure out how to get the students coming back. And I think this charter school that we're starting is a great foot in the door for that. We have to stand out from the rest of the districts. Why do we want to pull other kids in from other districts? Well, we need to be different. We need to be completely different than everybody else and then what we're doing. So I have full faith that we'll be able to accomplish this.
Nikki, can I just clarify one thing? The charter school is not related to the school district. It will be its own separate school. So it'll be a competitor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
They're
not
gonna-
our stuff.
They're going to take students away from us
Oh.
And the money.
with the money.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So we have to be super creative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so really the online one is what we should, along with in-person, be focusing on.
Correct.
But the charter one is like they'll be all leaving like they're going to another state, another city, but the state pays them and our kids.
But we
wouldn't
have
normally go here.
we have our staff working on it, creating it. Is that how
No.
that is?
No.
Okay.
No,
I guess I'm
um,
going to have to look into that a little bit more then.
it's my understanding that we pay for transportation.
Only if they contract with us. They have to let us know.
Okay.
It's like Pepsi and Coca-Cola, two different products.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, Nikki, maybe from a different perspective, if you're looking at the school district, I think that's what we're kind of talking about. But if you're looking from the community of Red Wing, then having two distinct schools might bring, more students overall into the community. But clearly, some of our students will possibly choose to go to the charter school and then our enrollment goes down.
Okay, that just means that I'm gonna have to get really super creative. Oh, they were luring me with Dakota language, guys. But I know. We can do it. We can do it. I never back down from a challenge, and there's nothing too big that I don't ever tackle. So I have faith in us,
Whoop, whoop.
even against the charter school.
Okay. I think then that wraps this up.
All right.
We'll see you
All
soon.
right, Jim. Are you excited? You can go get a snack. We can't hear you.
I'm good. I don't need a snack at all. I just like to get prepared for the next meeting. How's that sound? Now can you hear me? Or did she leave? Did you leave now? Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
See you later.
Bye.
We'll have to remind people that this is on so that conversations will be recorded. Unless I can stop this.
You could probably mute it.
Yeah. Yep, Nikki's on.
Yeah, I see it, right, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I couldn't hear her.
Able to
I think
hear
she
and
said
see.
something and I didn't hear it.
Vicki, can you hear us and see us?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, all right. Well, then I will go ahead, it is 6:01 and we'll call this school board workshop to order. It is Monday, March 22nd, 6:01 PM. I will take a roll call, starting with Mr. Bryant,
Here.
Ms. Buck,
Here.
Mr. Derrick,
Say Derek's here.
Ms. Ostendorf,
Here, do I have to
Ms.
unmute?
Howard,
Here.
Ms. Tips,
Here. Oh, you didn't hear it?
and Chair is here, so we have all school board members present along with Superintendent Anderson. We'll go ahead and rise and say the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. I have asked Jennifer Tipp to share our mission this evening.
The mission of the Red Wing Public Schools is to educate and inspire all students as they realize their full potential and become respectful, responsible, and productive citizens.
Thank you. We have the meeting agenda scheduled, and because this is a workshop, we'll need to stick to the agenda that has been posted. This is our first back kind of hybrid meeting this evening, so we've got 3 members here physically in the school building and 4 virtual, so hopefully we'll be able to see and hear each other okay. If there are issues with technology, please let us know and we'll pause to make sure that we get those corrected. And we will continue, even though some people are in person, we'll continue to use the chat for any comments or to raise your hand when you'd like to speak. So with that, anything else on the agenda? Okay, then the sole reason for our meeting this evening, the school board workshop, is to talk about budget. And so the first order is reasons for budget reductions. And I will turn that over to Superintendent Anderson, who will address that.
Thank you, Pam. When Jim, Pam, and I met to discuss the agenda this evening, we decided to break it into 4 different parts. The first part has to do with a reason why we're here today to talk about budget reductions. And just to make it crystal clear why, because we need all of us to understand and we need the public to understand why we're here. There are 4 or 5 main reasons why. First of all, due to COVID, the district has hired additional personnel. For example, we added 9 online-only teachers, custodians, substitutes, a nurse, administrator at the high school, as well as support personnel. And all of that was done to provide, the best quality online instruction we could, as well as to find a way to bring kids back into the building as soon as possible. So that's the reason we hired additional personnel. Without those folks, there's no way we could have maintained 6-foot social distancing last fall. There's no way we could have had decent class sizes and online instruction at the same time. So, it's something we just had to do. The second reason is that also because of COVID, we had additional expenditures. Many of these expenditures were paid for using COVID relief funds. But when we're looking at one expenditure budget from one year into the next, as if and when we can cut back on those expenditures, it's still considered a budget reduction. And so some of the additional expenditures included the use of Jefferson School, for example, snow plowing, utilities, and other operational expenditures. We've also had significantly more cleaning expenses in terms of supplies and services, those kinds of things. Third reason is that like other districts throughout the state, we've had decreased number of students, about 120 fewer students compared to May of 2020. It's a statewide phenomenon. Jackie reported earlier to Finance Committee that there are about 17,000 fewer kids this year in public schools in Minnesota compared to last year. The fourth reason is that the budget assumptions assume a 0% state aid increase for the upcoming school year. I will say that we've had better statewide projections in terms of revenue, so hopefully we'll get more than 0%. But we're always cautious at this time of the year in terms of what our budget might look like. And so right now we're assuming a 0% increase. Kind of the fifth item that's not listed in the agenda packet is that we have not included additional COVID funding from the state and federal government. So we know that we are going to be receiving some, and that's not reflected in the budget for next year yet. But we think it's important to kind of scale back where we need to go, and then we can finalize how we'll use that additional COVID revenue. So those are the 4 or 5 reasons why we're here tonight, and certainly we can discuss those, and I'll try to answer any questions that you may have.
Does anybody have any questions about the background information? Anna?
Do you have any idea how much we might expect from state and federal? Is there any sense of that, or when that might happen?
Jackie, why don't you answer that?
From the second round of COVID that we received in December, early preliminary allocations have estimated 1.2 million. The ARP, the American Rescue Plan that just passed about a week ago, we are getting additional money from there. Allocations have not been set. The holdup on the CARES funds that was passed in December is the state legislature needs to appropriate them to the Department of Ed, and it has not made it through the session yet. Once that makes it through the session, the Department of Ed can get us final allocations and we can have spending authority. So currently we don't have any authority to spend those dollars. The other holdup with this is we don't know what strings will be attached to these funds and how we can spend them. So one of the reasons we look at budget reductions now, and then when we get the federal funds, we can look at how we can spend those federal funds and maybe bring some things back that fall in line with those requirements.
Another news story that I read today off the MSBA listserv is that the second round of COVID money was about 1.2 million, maybe a little more. The estimates for the third round might be double that. However, we will need to spend some of the money, I think 20%, on addressing learning loss. So that could be through before school and after school programming. It might be summer school programming. We don't have all the regulations about that either, but that's kind of a rough estimate. I don't think it's a strong enough estimate to say, well, this is what it's going to look like for next year, but at least it kind of gives you an idea of where we might be at.
Any other questions or comments on the reasons for our budget reductions? Seeing none, then we'll move on in our agenda to the next topic, which is the open enrollment report. Dawn Wettern, Director of Community Ed and Rec.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have a document put up on the screen. Give Jackie a minute to put that up. I'll just give a little background. We've had school board members in the past and also present that have wondered why individuals leave our district. When people choose to leave the district, the Minnesota Department of Ed has them complete a form. On that form is a specific question that says, why are you leaving the district? A lot of individuals have not filled out that piece of the form. So what we did in the last couple of months is we contacted people that did not fill out that question, reached out to them and asked them what were the reasons that they left the district. And this is a pie graph here that talks a little bit about why individuals responded, how they responded. One is that if you look at the biggest area is the location. We have turned it convenience. It's either that they live on the border, they live closer to a specific school that they're enrolling in, they have childcare options in that school district that's either family or friends, so that will reduce costs for them, or they have a job in that community, so it's more convenient for them to take their kids there, be there in case the weather's bad, in case they get sick. So that is the largest portion. That was about 61 people of the people that we contacted, or 61% of individuals that responded with those reasons. About 17% did not respond. They either wouldn't respond when we talked to them, we weren't able to contact them, or they did not call us back if we asked them to do that. So again, we gave that option. If we would reach them and they didn't want to respond, we just thanked them for their time and moved on. The other is that they wanted to, when they moved, they might have moved to Red Wing, but they were going to school in another community. They may have been a 10th grader and they wanted to stay with their class. That was several of the responses that we received. And so they just opted to stay at that school, and often they would commute back and forth or ride with others. A lot of those individuals were also on the border that made it convenient to go back to that community. Health issues, if they had indicated that they wanted to be closer to a medical facility, these were specifically related to people going to school in the Hastings area or up closer to the metro. Chemical dependency units, fragile health issues, parents just were more comfortable having children close by. The conflict with other students were mainly issues that they had that they perceived as bullying or behavioral issues. They didn't get along with some of the kids in the district, and they opted to try another school. The other school better suited to their child, which was about 4%. Some of the responses were that they were more comfortable in a smaller school setting. They preferred the curriculum or the content of the classes that were being taught. There were specific programs that they wanted to attend, anywhere from, orchestra options to wrestling to additional choices that they could get to attend classes, or that there were some social activities provided in that community that they felt like could keep their downtime a little more occupied. The educational needs of the child were basically classes that were offered, or if they were non-English speakers, often they had family members in another community, and they would the family could support them in their learning those English skills. The online learning, we do offer online learning, but they had responded that some of the options that they had for online learning, they were more comfortable with those options, or they liked more of a hybrid. And so if you page down in this, so that's the pie chart. And if you go down a little bit in this, up a little bit, thank you. This is the individuals, where the schools that they're going to. So if you look across that scale, those are the schools and the numbers of individuals that responded and where they're going. And at the bottom of the page is the variety of online schools that people opted to enroll in. Does anybody have any questions? Or we did reach out to several families. Now what we've been doing this summer, Melinda Johnson in the district office is a new employee. As people submit these forms to her, if they don't fill them out, she has been contacting them. So we get some more immediate information. I think that will be very helpful as we move forward in finding out why people leave the district.
I see Alan's coming through.
There, finally got unmuted. Is it possible that we could get a more clear picture where our why our students are going to the two or three largest categories. I'm looking at Goodhue here. We must have around 43 or 44 students enrolled out to Goodhue. And Hastings is rather large at 20, probably 27 or 28. And see why they're going to those two districts. Just to clarify it, if it is convenience or there are other reasons why that particular district was picked out.
Yeah, what we were trying to do is not identify individuals, but the majority of people going to Goodhue, they live on the border, they like the smaller school, they perceive Goodhue has a smaller class size. I think that from what I've seen is some of our class sizes are pretty comparable, so how do we promote that information and market ourselves to get out some of the things that people are looking at, we also can provide. So our class sizes, we've stayed pretty close to class numbers since Karsten's been here, some target numbers. And I think that's a misconception. So maybe what we need to look at is how we can provide some clarifying information to people before they choose or as they become school age. So in our preschooler ages, make sure that those families are aware of our class sizes. But a lot of that, Arlen, was that they're either closer or they like a smaller school. They don't like the vastness of Red Wing. And then Hastings in that direction is mostly convenience that parents work in the metro area where the majority of those comments, or they have family members that can provide childcare and they like having kids closer if there would be an issue with weather. Those were the majority of the Hastings direction towards the metro. And we also did have some medical issues there was chemical dependency or fragile health. And that was some options that people preferred Hastings. It was closer to the metro.
Thank you. Holly.
Okay, this is why I can't talk because I have my nose like this. So I'm just going to talk without my face. Now, when we were just in the finance committee, Jackie mentioned that through her MASPO surveys, which I can't remember what that means, but it's something with the financial people across the state, that Red Wing is not alone in having to deal with budget reductions for schools our size. And across the state, 17,000 kids have left public schools. So this isn't an isolated Red Wing issue. This is across the state where families have chosen to pull their kids from public schools in response to how COVID has happened and, somehow impacted their family in a way that the public school just wasn't working for them anymore. So I thought it was really interesting that we're not alone, even though we feel alone, because it's a big thing and it impacts us significantly. And maybe Jackie, you can speak to that just a little bit more about the survey that went out.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you.
Do you want to talk about that now, Jackie, or you want to wait?
Why don't we wait till my section and we'll let Dawn continue? She
Okay,
has more.
sounds good. Nikki's in the queue right now.
I don't know if any of you know, but I pulled a child out of the district because, my child had opposite issues. She was highly intelligent, and from kindergarten to third grade, she's been used as a teacher's aide. And so her emotional development got left behind. And then all of a sudden by third grade, we have severe mental health issues and we're going down a dark path. So me as a mother, I pulled her from the district because the class sizes are too big to focus on her mental health, to get her caught up for the 3 years that she missed out because she was too busy helping the teachers academically with her peers. So I brought her to Montessori school and they had the smaller class sizes and it's a different learning structure. So it encouraged her to problem solve her own problems. We had an incident that happened there with my son, and it was incredibly traumatizing. and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it because private schools do not protect the children. So I pulled them from the private school and brought them back to the public school because I knew the public school could protect them against any discrimination or anything. So from my own personal experience, the class sizes are really large, especially when you're dealing with a lot of mental health issues. That was just from my experience.
Thank you, Nikki. Jim, Cindy, and then
Did you say me, Madam Chair?
yes, sir.
Oh, okay. I didn't. Thank you. Dawn, I'll ask you this for a number for this one, and then at the end of your next slide, you can tell me that number too. I think I already added that one, a little easier to add up. How many students are enrolling out of our district?
Well, what we surveyed was 131, but what we need to clarify, and I should have clarified this earlier, is once you fill out a form to open enroll into another district, you do not need to fill another one out. So what we did is contact the most recent individuals, and there may be additional people since the contacts were made that we need to get on a chart with Melinda to make sure we can, if anybody's open enrolled lately, we can also make sure we note those reasons. So.
Okay, and that our declining enrollment is just not kids leaving the school, going to other schools either. So, okay.
And
Thank
we
you.
do, just to clarify too, also the private school does have about 59-60 students, and then our parochial school also has about 38. So those, now the money for the private school does not follow them, and Jackie, please jump in, but if it becomes a charter school, then they would be able to generate revenue to serve those students at that point.
Right, we don't get revenue for any non-public students, so the state doesn't pay any revenue out to either the non-public schools. But once they become a public charter school, they would get state aid. So it would follow the student to the public charter school.
Right. Okay.
All right, Anna.
Thank you so much for doing this, Dawn. Sorry.
No problem.
Force of habit to turn it on. I'm always afraid I'm not going to turn it on.
I know.
Oh, man. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for doing this, Dawn, and the rest of your team for working on this. One thing a category that I don't see is one that I've sort of heard people talking about is pulling their kids because they wanted a school that was more in person than Red Wing had opted to be. What category would that have fallen under? Would that have been in the another school better suited, or did you hear that from parents?
No, to be honest with you, people were very hesitant. We had people that were really uncomfortable. Sometimes there's a reason they didn't fill in that question. And so we tried to balance it to be very sensitive to, if they did not want to answer the question, we respected that. We did not hear that. We did hear individuals indicate and express concern about COVID, and they did not want them in person. And so they opted to homeschool or keep them at home. There is another group of individuals in this community, and that's our homeschool students, and we cannot find out any information. There was a change in the legislature a few years ago, and we're not able to know who they are or get any information on children who choose or families who choose to homeschool. So you're right, Anna, we did not, but there was a real balance between asking too many questions and backing off and respecting people's right not to answer the question. So.
Anything else, Dawn, that you would like to share with us this evening, or does anybody have any more questions?
Well, we do, just one other quick thing. We do have another document, and it's people that choose to opt into Red Wing. And this is interesting because when people fill out this form, It specifically indicated to the district, you cannot ask them why they are coming to Red Wing. That is a requirement. And so we were only able to collect information on individuals who answered that question. And if you'll see here, the individuals who open enroll, these are the communities open enroll for, and the reasons are they prefer the education that we offer in our district. They were going to another district and they switched to Red Wing for whatever reason. There wasn't any specification on that. They moved from distance learning into in-person. So there are better programs in Red Wing. They wanted to continue in Red Wing. They may have moved away, but they opted to stay in this district. So they're bringing their student to the Red Wing area, even though they may have moved to Cannon Falls or Lake City. And then the large number was not, they did not answer that question. And we did not reach out to these individuals because we have been directed that we can't do that. Once they're enrolled, I think we can ask them, how they like the district, what have they found that, has really been beneficial to them. So I think we could do some customer service satisfaction once they come to the district, but it can't be a question we ask them before they're officially enrolled.
So if I'm doing my math correctly, that's 32 students in that we know.
You're on mute, Don.
Those are the individuals, Pam, that have completed the form just this year alone.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I was just going to comment that when Jim got this information a couple of weeks ago, a month ago maybe, we just found this to be very beneficial to understand the clearer picture of who's coming in, who's leaving, and why. I think that is, some key information here to make decisions moving forward. So Dawn, thank you for pulling this together for us. I think it's very valuable information. I know, Arlen, you've been looking at this information or wanting this information for a long time. And so now what do we do with it, right? This is really great information, but the next step on a different evening would be to talk about what are we going to do with this information now that we have that. So.
Well, and fortunately, Melinda Johnson in the district office is asking people as they submit these forms, so we won't have to go back several years. We're getting it, as it happens. So that will be beneficial as we go forward.
Absolutely.
So I really do appreciate her, because she did that on her own. So I would like to, publicly thank her for doing that. She has a conversation with people when they opt in or opt out, if she can.
Thank you. Excellent. Any last things for Dawn before we move to the next topic? All right, seeing none, then the next item on our agenda is budget reduction targets. Jackie is the presenter for this next portion.
All right, since it was already introduced, I will lead off with the MASBO 2021 budget survey. So MASBO stands for the Minnesota Association of School Business Officials. So basically my counterparts in and around the state. The legislative committee of MASBO did a budget survey. The press release is included in your board packet. It talks about how the February forecast now has a budget surplus, how many districts responded. So out of the 333 school districts statewide, 144 responded to the survey. 92% said with no state aid formula increase, their general fund expenditures would exceed projected revenues for next school year. Some of the largest school districts, so the largest school district in the state, Anoka Hennepin, is projecting a deficit of more than $14 million. Some other rural districts like Thief River Falls and Princeton were more around the $2 million mark, Robbinsdale at $4 million, and then regional centers like St. Cloud, Bemidji, and Mankato of $3, $5, and $7 million respectively. if the state education formula does not increase this year. The other piece, which Holly alluded to, is the paragraph on the bottom of page 1 going into page 2. The second sentence, according to the Minnesota Department of Education, 17,000 students withdrew from public schools last fall due to COVID-related concerns, leaving a gaping hole in school district revenues. So that is what Holly was alluding to earlier. We need to strongly advocate for funds to mitigate the enrollment decline and at least a 2% increase in the education formula and to link it permanently to inflation. So that is what the Madisonville Legislative Committee is putting forward. We'll see where it goes. Below that line, there are the responses to the questions if you're interested. So that is one of the newer items in there. Also in your packets were some budget stories, and enrollment and financial stories were included as extras. Those were more to give you history on where we've been and where we're going. The other pieces in here we have talked about at a board meeting before. Would you like me to go over them again and pull them up? Would you like me to go over some of those financial stories to kind of ground us in where we've been? I guess what more information would you like me to present?
Well, Arlen's in the queue, so we'll give that to him for now, and then we'll ask what people think. Arlen, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're hearing that most districts are losing students this year. This report Jackie just gave, I thought she just said 17,000 students magically disappeared. I guess I'm just curious, where did they go? They had to be absorbed somewhere. Is that in a homeschooling category that we don't have? Is that where they went? I don't. 17,000 students moved out of state. So I guess where did those 17,000 students end up?
All three of the categories you just mentioned. They went into non-public schools, home schools, and moved out of the state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think some of them also went into distance learning or to other places like that too. So, but I think tonight our workshop, we had the 4 scenarios and a recommendation. I think this is our time to ask questions, decide what we want to do. From doing nothing to 4 million is the scenarios. So I think that's it's going to be the topic that we're going to have to decide, because keep in mind, whatever we decide, but recommend to the April 5th meeting, that's only for 1 year, and then we have to look again after that. So keep that in mind. Declining enrollment, the Montessori charter school starting a little bit more in another 17 to 18 months will probably have an impact, if not during the next school year as well. On top of that, distance learning. We talked to the finance committee a little bit about focusing on trying to make our school the school that people want to come to, and or the distance learning program that they want to enroll in and participate in. With that too, at the MASBO, whatever that survey was, it's good. 100 and, if I remember right, 133 of the 300 and some 50 some schools participated in it, some to that degree. So 17,000 is a lot of kids. I get that. We're not facing it alone, declining enrollment. But today, I know the governor's recommending a 1% increase in funding, but end of the day, it's, the last minute in May there when they decide what the budgets will look like. We can hope for more, but realistically, we really won't know until May when the final budget is presented and signed and negotiated and compromised with both bodies of the legislature and the governor. So I'll sit back and listen. I'll have some thoughts as we go forward on what I'd like to say and see, but I think beneficial for everybody else to participate.
I think Jackie was you're looking for a recommendation on, should she go through all of these scenarios again? And if you could do that very briefly, and then maybe focus in on, I see there's a suggestion of the reduction that you're making here tonight. So if you could just give us I know it's a lot of information, but if you could give us a little bit of an overview again, that would be very helpful.
So I'll pull these up again one by one. First, I'll start with the 2018 referendum plan. The 5-year plan we put together for the 2018 referendum. Again, this is a little different report because schoolfinances.com, which made this report in 2018, got bought out by Forecast 5. So the report changed a little bit in how it's laid out. But you can see then that our end of year unrestricted unassigned fund balance at the end of 21-22, which is the year we're working on, during the referendum, and what we did there was projected to be about 1.97 or $2 million. So that was the target I was trying to get to when I made my recommendation. So that's the my source of information there. I'll exit out of here. First off is the base plan with no changes. So what this assumes is whatever we budgeted for this fiscal year with our revised budget, we're going to take it into next year with some inflationary assumptions for salary and benefits and health insurance and things like that. This would bring our unassigned fund balance at the end of 21-22 would be negative $206,150. We would not be meeting our goal reserve, but we would not quite yet be in statutory operating debt. So that is if we made no changes. The first scenario there is to reduce $4 million. Now, why did I pick $4 million? $4 million would balance our budget for next year to where we would almost have the same revenues and expenditures. This would bring our unassigned fund balance, if you can see it, on these reports, it's a very lightly shaded orange line, to about an even $4 million, $4,059,000. So that would make our revenues and expenditures equal for next year, and we would use very little, if any, fund balance. The second scenario there is 2.2 million. This one is the one that goes back to the 2018 referendum plan. It gets us back on track to there where we have an unassigned fund balance of 2.1 million. So that is why that is the scenario I am recommending. It puts us on track with our referendum plan, which to me at least is the promise we've made to the community, is that that will be our plan. The third scenario is $1 million. And why $1 million? 1 million is roughly the amount of staff we have added to operate this year in COVID. So the extra teachers we've added, the extra custodians we've added, the extra paraprofessionals we've added. And if we only cut $1 million and did nothing else, that would leave our fund balance at $807,000 for the end of next year. We'd still have a fund balance. We would not be in statutory operating debt, but we would not be at our fund balance reserve goal of 5%. The third scenario is to reduce $3 million. Why $3 million? In reality, it was just, we had already had a 1, a 2, and a 4. 3 was that somewhere in the middle between 2 and 4, kind of a compromise position between cutting to a zero balanced budget, being at the 2018 referendum targets, and kind of a compromise between the two of those. We would then have an unassigned fund balance at the end of next year of about just under 3 million, 2.976. We would have met our fund balance goal and we would not be in SOD. Any questions on that? Like Jim mentioned, these are for a 1-year reduction plan. If you look out on any of those scenarios, there would have to be future reductions if enrollment stays where it's at.
Thank you, Jackie. I think that was a really good summary of those scenarios. Questions for Jackie? Comments? Thoughts? Anyone? All right. Jim? I see your microphone off, Jim. Go ahead.
I'll keep the floor here. Yeah, it's not doom and gloom, everybody. It's just something we have to look at. Declining enrollment is something everybody's facing. There isn't, as that survey said, most of them are all looking at some type of reductions in their spending. Our decision that we have to make on the 5th is predicated on a couple things, contracts and getting people notice to them in a proper way if we're doing anything. Also, back in 18 when the promises were there for the referendum and all that, I think we were, and Jennifer might know this or some others might know this better, that the thought was that the enrollment would be steady. That's a big part of it. Nobody predicted, even in referendum discussions, a pandemic. So we're faced with this because we were elected to be on the school board and to do this. So I'll start the discussion. I'll start it. I like the 3 million halfway between the 2.2 and 4. Gives us something to start with and see how the year goes and make adjustments for the following year. So how we get there, we can have that discussion, but I think the 3 million is something I would be interested in having go forward.
Anna?
I agree. I think I'm personally kind of torn between either the 2.2 or the 3, especially because we don't know if, when, how much money is going to be coming back from COVID relief. I am concerned that if we cut too severely and we lose good quality people and then we have extra money, like, can we get those people back? Can we get, the same standard? But if the money doesn't come in time, I also don't want to, have us cutting more, and that's not fair to people either. I see, Jackie, you have the 2.2 or 3 million in reductions, that chart that you did. So I guess I would like to hear from other board members, like where everybody else is kind of leaning with what number they're thinking about. And then if it's something different than me, what the reasons are so that, I can see if there's something that I'm missing. And then, Jackie, if you could kind of go through that, practically what that means, cutting 2.2 or 3, and maybe that can help us narrow it down.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Arlen and then Holly.
Thank you. Farther into the board packet here, there's ideas where the cuts would be for 2.2 million and 3 million. I am leaning towards the 3 million. I want to make sure that if there's any way we can to honor our promises from the referendum in that process as far as class size. Personally, I think we need to cut a couple sports, but I know we promised at that referendum we would not cut sports, so it's off the table on my end. I intend to push to maintain whatever the promises were to the public with this money. I had a hard time going for that referendum when we did back in 2018. I'm going to have this feeling that I think a lot of others are, that we're currently at just about the max on an operating referendum. A lot of districts aren't anywhere near that amount. And if we can't make our budget balance, there's something wrong here and we got to figure it out. Somewhere there's got to be something, and I don't know where it is because I've been on this board for 6 years and I haven't found it yet. But other schools are able to operate at a lower cost per student than us, it seems. And I do know some of it enters into our cross subsidies for programs and different things. Special education costs are higher here, or there's more special ed students that we're getting 50% funding back on rather than 100%. But I'm talking way too much. What I saw on the board packet, I think the target should be that 3 million, and I would be very comfortable we ended up at 2.2 or whatever it was. But I'm fully on board with that 3 million type of scenario that's laid out. I think if we go for a bigger number, we have the ability to possibly add a couple things back in. But if you go too low on what your cuts are right away and then try to cut more later, it's not going to work. So we got to project bigger to start with. Thank you.
Holly.
Thank you. When I first got on the board, I heard this over and over again, that we don't have the money, we didn't have the money, we don't have the money, we didn't have the money. I get it. And at the same time, there are ways that we can work within what we have to expound on what we have. And when I was looking at some of the graphing that Jackie presented around where we spend more of our money than other districts and why we spend more of our money than other districts on those areas, I think those are conversations that the board should be privy to, not just the finance committee, so you understand the big picture. And with that said, I'm always in the mindset that public education is expensive. It's not a money-making game. It never has been. And it gets more expensive every single year with the cost of inflation. That's just the bottom line. And originally I had thought closer to the 3 million, but now that I know that we are getting those packages from the state and the federal government, I am more inclined to lean into the 2.2 million. And I really want to hear what the administrative team has to say about where they think they could possibly cut, what they think they need to keep this going, and what they think they need to, thrive. Because as we talk about cutting, we talk about losing kids. We also can't gut our programs and gut our education for students and expect to keep kids. So I think it's a longer conversation that we have to have, but I'm more inclined to go with the 2.2. And if it has to be 2.4, okay. I think 3 is too steep. And I just come back to always public education is expensive. It always has been. And that's for a good thing. I mean, this is what our democracy is supposed to be built on. So I'm just going to leave it there with my little diatribe.
Thank you, Holly. Nikki.
I agree with everything that Holly had said. When I was hearing the budgets, something with me said scenario 2. And then when I heard Jackie's recommendation, this is her specialty. So I like to listen to our staff that has recommendations, and I like to try and honor as best as I can, especially when it matches with what I want to go with. And Holly, you explained it so beautifully. Thank you very much. I agree with Holly for the exact same reasons. And I'm one that likes to think outside of the box. If we have to just bring it down a little bit, I'm more going to put my Tetrising mind to how can we get that student enrollment back up. That's where I will focus my attention on what can we do to stand out as Red Wing Public School District to get our enrollment back up.
Jennifer?
I agree with both Holly and Nikki. I appreciate that Nikki mentioned Jackie and her expertise and the recommendation that she has for us. And so I tend to agree that that's the direction we should go. I also, the fact that we know that the funds are out there, additional funds that will be coming in, even though we don't know when they will, but we will be getting them. That also makes me feel better about the 2.2 rather than 3 million. But I do think because we're all kind of in the same place, the 2.2 and the 3, if we could just get more information about what that looks like, what kind of cutting that would be, and is there some way that we could look into, I don't know, making changes in where the money goes rather than how we're spending our money, to possibly cut down on some of the actual cutting out. And I'm very new to this. I admit I know very little about this. I need a lot more experience. But I'm just wondering if there are other ways we can think outside the box instead of just cutting everything. And then also I have a question about the online learning and where that comes in here and what that is going to cost us, assuming we can continue with providing that next year.
Superintendent Anderson, do you want to answer that question? Or?
Yeah, I'll answer the last question that Jennifer had because I think that's an important decision we're gonna have to make. Jennifer mentioned, how much it would cost to do online only again next year. Right now, the plan is that we will work with the other GCD school districts and the Goodhue County Education District and have one online school that would represent all of us. Now, most of those kids would likely be coming from Red Wing. And so, but the problem is that we don't know exactly how many will choose that option for next year. So what the administrators did is come up with we have a rough idea how many total students we have. We have our class size targets. And so we figured out, what the class sizes would likely be. The only problem, we don't know how many will be in person and how many will be online only. And so, some of those adjustments are gonna have to change. My thinking right now is that we can make the reductions and then hire back our online only teachers, especially at the elementary, maybe even 1 or 2 at the high school in order to provide that service. But we would use the COVID relief funds to do that. There are 2 advantages. First of all, we get the teachers we want to teach those classes in the online school. And then second, every time they're online students, if we have those extra teachers, and that brings down the in-person class sizes, which is one of the factors I think that Nikki mentioned. We want to put our best product on the table. One of those issues has to do with class sizes. And so if we can, possibly reduce that a little bit by using the COVID funding for the online schooling, that'll help there too.
Well, and in all of these scenarios, we talk about what the fund balance would be, and I think that's always an important piece to bring to the discussion. I had asked that question before about fund balance and why that's important and why we need it. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about, the fund balance and what it's used for, why we've set the 5% target? Anybody have any questions about the fund balance? No? Okay. Oh,
Talk about what I have shared. So hot off the presses, the Legislative Audit Committee has just approved the disbursement of the round 2 funds.
oh,
So we should be getting allocations from the Department of Ed shortly.
well, that's,
Awesome. Thank you.
wow, good. Hot off the press, yes. Jim, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During our Finance Committee, Jackie, if you could find that fund balance one that we pulled up, there was like 6 or 8 schools. We were like the second from the bottom of that. Then the line was there. Fund balances, people say, why do you have a fund balance? Well, you need a fund balance for that rainy day when something happens besides getting, we'd have had to have it here if we didn't get money for COVID that we got. So you need to have a fund balance, and I will argue strongly to keep that fund balance healthy. End of the day, if you don't have a fund balance, then you're putting stuff on credit cards, and eventually you got to pay back those credit cards. You're just borrowing ahead. And I'm a proponent of having funds available to keep the operation going, and I'm a strong proponent of keeping things better than what they were when I got on anything. Not to say they're bad. I'm just saying I don't want to go backwards with it. So for somebody that lived in a flat roof for many, many years, you had to have money sit around because every so often it leaked. So you just couldn't spend everything you got and then hope that it never leaked. So I will argue tooth and nail to keep our fund balance healthy. So, and just keep in mind, whatever you decide on the number on the 5th, it's got to be, we've got to cut that and probably more the following year because the COVID money's not going to be there forever.
Jackie, you're looking for things to put up on our screen. Do you want to talk about healthy fund balances? I think that's where you're going with trying to find.
Yep.
Yeah.
See if I can find that slide again. So here it is. Or that's FTE.
That one.
This one. Yep. So what this shows is districts. They aren't neighboring districts. They aren't districts that are near us, but they are districts that have like enrollment and like poverty. So a like amount of students for enrollment size, and they also have somewhere in that neighborhood of 30% of students in poverty. Why do we choose that? Well, with districts, when you're looking at enrollment, you can get kind of that economies of scale where you can, at this enrollment, you can function super efficiently. So that's why we want to look at ones that are like enrollment, because we have probably about like operations. When we look at like poverty, poverty is sometimes an indicator of who might need special services. Not always, but sometimes it is. So those would be the districts that have to offer those extra services, maybe kind of like we do. So these are the districts, when you put in those factors, come up as comparable school districts. You can see the average here is the line, and then Red Wing is second from the bottom with our 5% fund balance. Healthy fund balance, a lot of districts will have that 10 to 15%. Ours is at 5%. Why 10%? Well, the state holdback in any given year is they pay you 90% of the aid you're owed in the current fiscal year and 10% in the next fiscal year. So that's why that 10% is there to help you cash flow. So that's where that stands. Any questions on fund balance?
Well, it is that kind of tricky teeter-totter, isn't it? Because you want to make sure you've got enough funds, but you also want to make sure that we're spending the money that we need to, but we need to be careful as well. And I know that in the past, we've worked really hard to make sure that we can, contribute to our fund balance every year. And maybe with COVID, this isn't necessarily the year that we're going to try and beef up that fund balance, but as long as that we can maintain our 5%, that's great. So I would be a proponent of that. I think about the 3 million, and I like to be conservative with dollars, and thinking ahead about trying to cut again and a lot more. Maybe it wouldn't be so horrible if we cut more now, but we don't know that. And so I very much appreciate the 2.2 million that has been suggested. And I think maybe this is the time to talk about real dollars and what does that mean with the suggested amounts. But before we move on in the agenda, does anybody have any last thoughts or questions? I see Arlen, you're in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. fund balance is very important, and I'm fully on board with trying to maintain the numbers we want. And one of the reasons for a fund balance is to take care of things when you have a year with unexpected expenses or unexpected loss of revenue. Something that might be caused by a pandemic or some other circumstance. My gosh, we've been in it this year. And fortunately, it appears that we will bring in additional revenue to help us from federal and state levels that'll compensate us for our extra costs this year. So the fund balance part isn't bothering me that much. I know it will build if we do the right things with our budget and our spending. When I came on the board here 6 years ago, we were cutting a couple million and another 1.5 million and started the very first meeting I attended. The big thing to remember for all of you is if cut, but don't overcut, but also realize if you don't cut an expense this year and you know you're going to have to cut some more next year, you've compounded the problem next year because it just builds on itself if you don't start working with it at an early time. So just, I'm okay. I want to keep our fund balance there. We need to, spending it isn't going to bother me. I think we're in a comfortable situation with our fund balance for the next couple of years, but by not cutting enough now, we can really compound the problem and the cuts we have to make in a future year. So just keep that in mind as we go. I'm real comfortable with the 2.2 or 3 million like other people have expressed, but just make sure we are on the right track for future years. Not that we have to do it all this year, but don't say, oh, we can cut it next year. That's not the answer. You got to start on something now. Thank you.
Anna.
I thank you for your thoughts. I am in thinking about the balance of not cutting enough. I guess I'm being a little more optimistic maybe. And like Jennifer said, I'm really new too. So this is all very, very new to me. And there's likely a whole lot of stuff I don't understand yet. I'm more inclined to be optimistic just because I'm hoping that as the pandemic eases, we see more people coming back. So our revenue will also go up in addition to our expenses, hopefully going down because we won't have as much going on with that. So I guess that's why I'm a little more okay with seeing, a few years down the road, if we picked 2.2 or 3, seeing those numbers not look the best down the road, because I feel like we need a little time to see how this shakes out. Do we see that those students who left don't come back? Do we see more students come in? What's the long range ramifications of COVID? And I think we just don't know. That's all.
All great points. Lots to think about here, folks. Are we okay to move on to what does the $2.2 million look like in real dollars? That is the next item on our agenda, the proposed reductions and additions. Superintendent Anderson, I see you're presenting here.
I'll present this portion of the agenda. The first chart in the background information shows elementary classroom teachers as far as the actual number in 2020, 21, as well as proposed for next year. Again, that's assuming that all the classes have the same, average class size per grade. And that won't happen with our, if we're offering the online only schooling. Of course, that won't work out just mathematically perfect. On the second page, you can see some other data that one of our board members have asked for. So you can see contracts for Jackie Paradis's work, as well as the district accountant through SMS. We also have 3 individuals who retired, but then are still working with us part-time, no more than half-time. And then just kind of as an extra information, the Goodhue County Ed District also has a contract with SMS, and so you can see how much they're paying for services through that entity as well. If we could go into the next sheet that has two columns of potential reductions. The first column says 2.5 million, and I'm sorry for that. That was my mistake. The goal for the reductions in that column was 2.2 million. I assume that we'd have the two possible targets. One is 2.2 million and one is 3 million. And then in both cases, we want to go a little bit more because we know that some cuts won't happen as we wanted. There'll be some other expenditures and those kinds of things. I know Jim has brought that up on several occasions, and I agree with that approach because it may not turn out to be exactly what we wanted. I'm not going to go through every single item on these columns because it's there in writing, and I know you've had a chance to take a look at it. But I'll hit the most important points. One thing I want to stress is that these reductions are affecting people, and so that always makes it especially challenging, not just for the staff members who might be reduced, but obviously those reductions impact our kids as well. So the first area has to do, and one other thing, we do have elementary representatives here. George is representing the high school. And so maybe I can go through the whole list, and unless there's some real quick clarifying questions, then after that we can kind of dive into different areas with our secondary and elementary representatives. The first area has to do with elementary teachers and support personnel. Again, we added staff members this year because of COVID. And so at this stage of the budget cycle, the recommendation is to reduce 12 of those positions. And that's because of COVID as well as right sizing. If we have fewer elementary kids, then typically we would have fewer teachers as well. At $85,000 per teacher, that amounts to just over $1 million in reductions. We also added some general education assistants. If we go for the $2.2 million target, the suggestion is to reduce the 5 of the 6 that we hired. And then if we go for the higher amount, it would be adding the 6th position. We really relied on general education paraprofessionals this year to provide prep time relief for our teachers. And so they really did all the recess. We had smaller class sizes, out of recess, and so we needed more general education assistants to make it work. And so that would be reduced. At the high school, right now, the recommendation is to reduce either 10 or 12 teaching positions. And a lot of that really depends on registration and scheduling decisions that George will need to make. He's been very busy working with the registration process right before spring break. He's looking at scheduling options to make sure that we find the right fit for the number of classes we want to offer. So many of the high school has largely been spared from reductions over the past 5+ years. This year it's a little bit different. First of all, it's George's second year, and so he better understands what we can do. And second, he's able to choose the schedule that really fits our needs and analyze the different positions in his school. We're also suggesting that we discontinue the school home liaison for behavior work that was recently held by Richard Torres. We added an assistant principal at the high school, so I don't think the need has been as high for that particular position. So in order to meet the budget target, the suggestion is not to replace that position. Richard took another position in another district, unfortunately, that we did lost. You can see that the closing of Jefferson School will yield about $200,000 worth of cuts because of the dean of students, 1.5 custodians, secretarial position, and nurse position. Those are the personnel savings resulting from closing the school. You can see the list of other personnel and contracted services. We would reinstate a PBIS coach. That was a promise that we've made as a result of our education plan. So we definitely want to follow through with that. We'd reduce some custodians depending on the target level. And we'd like to do that through attrition. We hired several people this past year. And so our thinking is that when they resign or retire, that we would not replace those positions until we get to the new level of our number of custodians that we're aiming for. You can see some reductions in the district office employees. We'd like to change our substitute pay. We had to increase the pay substantially this year to find as many subs as we could in order to have in-person instruction. Next year, we think we can lower the daily rate as well as reduce how many permanent substitutes we have. You can see a long list of other positions that we would like to add or consider changing, but they're not recommended at this time due to budget reductions. But feel free to know at least what we're thinking. I know that Nikki brought up the possibility of a grant writer as well. And I've heard that before too, so I should have added to that list. Right now, it's not recommended, but I think we need to leave our eyes open just in case. The next section has to do with early childhood and special education. We'd like to reinstate our early childhood director and eliminate the preschool coordinator position. That's been part of our plan. And we implemented the plan because Mid-Martin Oaks has been gradually cutting back on hours. And so she's helped us out this year, but next year we need to reinstate the director at that level. I'd also really like to add special education support in the district. I don't know if you recall, but about a year ago, we had a report done looking at special education administrative expenses, and the report was clear that we need to add more administrative support. We have a 2.2 million target. We think we could add 2 teachers or coordinators in the district. And the reason why that's such a low number is that we get about 50% reimbursed from the state. So instead of, it's a $170,000 cost, but we get $85,000 of that back. If we have the $3 million budget reduction, then the recommendation is to hire 1 instead of 2. At the end of this list, Sherry is available to answer questions about that as well. You can see some other reductions in terms of custodial supplies, activity supplies, health and safety consultant, transportation routes, possibly reinstating parking fees, although I don't want to do that, and then chargebacks to food service and community service. Many of those are really being pushed if we have to go for the 3 million target. I will add that the health and safety consultant, Shonda Jorgensen, has been fantastic this year. And so my first recommendation, perhaps in April or May, when we know all the rules and regs for the COVID relief funds, my first recommendation would be to bring her back, after considering reductions here. So anyway, the first column there totals just under $2.5 million in savings. The next column is just over 3 million. And so that's the administrative recommendations. After consulting with the principals as well as Jackie, that's where we are right now.
Holly.
Okay, can you explain that? I heard you loud and clear, Carson, and thank you for that. Can you explain it again in a really clear-cut summary? Because you gave your synopsis at the very end after explaining it. What are you asking for at the very end?
Yeah, really, in order to make decisions on April 5th, we need to know what the budget reduction target is, at least where we are right now. If that budget reduction target is 2.2 million, then the administrative team and I would like to recommend the first column, which would result in a nearly $2.5 million reduction at this stage of the cycle. If the feeling is that we should go for 3 million, then we would recommend the second column, perhaps with some adjustments as we go through the process, but that would total just over $3 million in savings.
Okay, so the first column is something that you have talked over with Jackie and the administrative team, and you have all kind of come together and said, we think this could work.
Yes. That's
Okay.
that.
Okay, I just wanted to know all the players at the table and who was all part of it. Okay, thank you.
Jennifer,
I just have a question about the transportation routes where it says larger savings with 2 mile walk zone not recommended. So is the 2 mile walk zone included in the cuts for the 3 million?
Yeah, it depends on the transportation adjustments that'll be made this spring. And I wish I had a hard number of routes we could save, but we had a change in our transportation router. And so I feel like we've lost a month's worth of work because of that. I'm meeting with Sarah Houle from the routing company this week to lay out the scenarios and to seek their advice as far as what makes most sense in terms of budget reductions. Do we have a 1-tier or 2-tier? Those kinds of things. But to answer your question specifically, the first column assumes that we can cut one bus route while we have a 1 mile walking radius for the elementary kids and a 2 mile walking radius for the secondary kids. The second column assumes 4 bus routes. We would make every effort to try to follow the 1 mile radius for the elementary kids, but I can't promise it. So chances are that we would have to be higher than the 1 mile, could be as high as 2 miles for the elementary kids as well. So that's one area that we just don't know for sure because we really need to rely on our transportation router to figure that out. I will say that in the referendum promise, we clearly laid out that if the referendum passed, if both questions passed, that we would have that 1 mile radius for the elementary kids, 1.5 for the middle school kids, and then 2 miles for the high school kids at the time. And so, that $240,000 projected savings is a big deal. We don't want to do that if we don't have to.
and when did you say you were meeting with Sarah?
This week.
Okay, because I think that piece of information is going to be pretty key
Mhm.
for this board to make a recommendation or endorse one of these 2 plans. I mean, that's significant.
Significant difference. Yeah.
Significant, yes. Nikki,
I had a question about it because I seen it on here. It says reduced hours for Mars coordinator and receptionist, and then what's Mars coordinator?
Oh, yeah, thank you for that clarifying question, Nikki. We have a Mars and student management system position. Right now, this one is held by Debbie Lundberg. She's working part-time. Her and Melinda work on everything related to student management. So when someone enrolls in the district, Debbie or Melinda enters that person into the system. If there's a transfer or reporting requirements to the state, they do all of that work. And so Debbie approached us just recently about cutting back on her hours for next year. And so that's the part that it indicates a $6,000 reduction in the first column. It would be a reduction of hours for Debbie, but she asked for a reduction. The second column would also include reducing the number of hours for our district office receptionist. And cutting back to 6 hours a day would save another $10,000. So it's the $6,000 from Debbie's reduction plus 2 hours per day from Lynn Nibby's.
I think she asked you what does Mars stands for. That's what I'd like to know too, right, Nikki?
Oh yeah, it's
All of the above.
well, and maybe Jackie knows the acronym for Mars, but it's really the student reporting system to the state. It's that interaction.
Minnesota Automated Reporting Student System, something to that effect. We're talking so many acronyms, I forget what they mean.
All the above, like Nikki says.
The whole state has changed that system. It used to be Mars, and now it's EdFi. And so there is a difference in the interaction between the school and the state.
Anna?
Okay, I don't know if this is reflected in this, but something that I've, just kind of heard people talking about, and we've seen some staff feedback about the difference between like a 7 and 8 period day or the block schedule. And I have to be honest, like I have no understanding of how the schedule affects the budget and what those costs are. So that's one thing that I'm wondering if that's like related to the teaching positions or how that exactly works. If you can just explain it to me like I'm 5, because I really don't get that. And then the other question I have is that it's not recommended in either scenario to discontinue the school police liaison officer. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about your reasons why. I know some districts have gone with discontinuing that contract in lieu of increasing like counseling services or having additional school staff that would kind of fill a similar role. So I'm wondering if you can talk about why that's not recommended, or just kind of, your thoughts and what the rest of the administrative team has maybe talked about with that.
George, would you mind talking about the scheduling
Sure.
differences?
Well, right now we are on what you would consider an 8-period day, okay? But it's a block schedule. And it's expensive because it does not have, for instance, study halls. That's a big money saver. I mean, I'm just going to throw it out there and be honest. So when you have students taking 8 of 8, that's expensive. And after a while, that accumulation, it costs a lot of money. So right now we're kind of running at kind of the most expensive type of schedule you can run. And that's part of the reason why we would maybe look to change how that schedule looks. And you could do an 8-period day without blocks. And the problem that you'll run into with that is a little bit is that the classes are going to be a lot shorter. So you're looking at much shorter class time. But it does. The nice thing about it is you do get 6 out of 8 classes being taught. So an individual teacher might teach 6 classes as opposed to in a 7-period day, the 5 every day. The nice thing about the 7 is that your class time is longer, and over the course of a semester, you're going to have much longer student-teacher contact time in a class period. So there's benefits and drawbacks to the 8 and the 7. I will say this, since we've been talking about the 3 million, it scares me when we talk about that, because now I get a little worried that we might even have to look at a 6-period day, which is much cheaper, but it's very limiting to how many classes a student can take. So that's why the deeper the cut, the more fearful I am that we're going to have to create a schedule that can work with that deep of a cut. I mean, if we're talking about cutting, 12 or 13 staff members, we're going to be looking at a very different schedule than what we operate on right now.
And if I could add, a 6-period day would be, I think violating the operating promises. And it would have a devastating impact on electives. So devastating. And that's why George and I think all of us, are really concerned about even thinking about a 6-period day. I think 7 or 8, we can make it work. And I think students will be happy. I think staff and our programming will be protected as much as possible. But a 6-period day just, it would have to be a last resort, like if a referendum doesn't pass or something like that, from my perspective anyway.
But with $3 million in cuts, that would possibly be necessary?
I'd have to look at, so the scenarios I've been working under, honestly, have been under a $2.2 million cut. I haven't really been focusing on a 3. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at what that might mean. I'm going to be honest with you, it's really hard to shoehorn what we're looking at already. So it's that's the difficulty with this process, obviously, and that's why I completely understand the need for the budget cut. I mean, I completely understand that. I just worry that if we go too deep, we're really going to put ourselves in a tough spot for next year. And the reason I say that is this: I think what we're looking at is a pretty. I mean, even at 2.2, I think you're looking at a pretty heavy shock to the system, so to speak, across the district, and not just at the 712 building. So to go 3 is even, that's an even bigger shock. And so I think, it may be prudent, and I'm just throwing this out there, but it might be prudent to think about, because I think, and maybe it was Jackie who brought that up and had said maybe, going 2.2, knowing, and I think Jim brought it up actually, that we might have to go with almost as much the following year, but that might be more palatable in the end for a district that's trying to right size a little bit and kind of save some opportunities for kids and things like that. So that's kind of the idea behind it.
Could I just go off of Kim? Is that okay? Right, it's not your meeting, that's right, it's your meeting.
That's right.
Just as a reminder, a good question to Anna was, explain this to me in a 5-year-old. So every time a teacher teaches a class, if you think that we budget for 85,000 per teacher, right, Jackie? So if they are teaching a 3 out of 4 block, so 1/3 of their day, so 33%, whatever that is of 85,000, that's how much that class costs per. So then if we go to 6 of 8, you make that smaller, but if you go to 5 of 7, and then you just have less offerings for the kids, that's where you get where the money comes, why the schedule goes to the money.
Okay.
Because every class costs however much of the teacher's contract.
Okay.
One of the nice things, and I'll just piggyback off of Kim if I may. All right. Is and I know, I understand that study halls aren't, necessarily wanted by all, but they are something that some students benefit from. But the other part of it is that it does offer an opportunity to save some money, because that student isn't taking exactly what Kim was saying. That student isn't taking a class that hour. Therefore, it's part of a supervisory duty of our staff. We're not paying for that class, so that there's some savings in that regard. And like I said, I think sometimes people look at study halls as kind of a bad thing. They're not. I mean, some students actually need that, and I think most people know that they can be helpful. I do think that there was a time in this district, and I remember it well because I was teaching in this district at the time, where we were having kind of runaway. It was almost like inflation of study halls, like that was a problem, But I think we're well beyond that. I think we would be using our study halls responsibly, but in the same sense, also saving some money.
Thank you for that explanation. I think that helps.
Georgia, just a quick question and I realize you haven't made the final recommendation yet, but would students have to take a study hall, or are you thinking that?
No. We've had, actually, in our registration, we offered that as an option in registration. And we have, roughly right now, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 students, 300, 400 students have signed up for a study hall in their schedule. There could be others that might also find that attractive as well. If, for instance, and I'll lay out the scenario. If we have to cut back in a certain area where they had signed up for a class and now they can't take that class because we had to cut it, they might opt for a study hall option rather than their secondary. Everybody signed up, well, as you guys all know, I mean, all the students signed up for secondary options within the registration process. But if those options are either, they don't really want that one, or it doesn't fit in the schedule, they could use a study hall option as well.
Yeah, I think that's really an important distinction, because there are some kids who want, either 7 or 8 full classes, maybe college level or whatever it might be. They want the opportunities. They can still do that next year with Georgia's schedule. Or if they need some extra time to kind of regroup or to catch up on homework, perhaps ask the study hall teacher for some help on some things, possibly. Kind of gives kids flexibility and helps us as well. Another huge thing is that it can be very challenging to force kids to take a class that they didn't want to take. You want kids, obviously we have requirements, but you want the kids to explore some options, but then also take the classes that they want. And so I think Georgia's schedule will accommodate that.
Holly, you're in the queue.
Thank you.
Hold on, Ellie.
Oh,
Yep.
My question was about the school liaison officer. If you have a second.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Anna.
Sorry about that.
my
Yep.
apologies.
Right now, we spend just over $60,000 on a police liaison officer. Part or all of that cost does come out of a special funding source. I will acknowledge, though, that I think that same funding source could probably be used for a counselor or some other support. It depends on the counseling, or it depends on the funding source and how we're doing the allocations. My preference is to do both. It sure is nice to have the police liaison officer here, mostly in the high school. I think that provides an extra level of support for the administrative team. But I'll tell you what, now with, especially this year after COVID, we're going to need to really consider adding some extra mental health support, counselors, social workers, using COVID relief money initially, possibly. The only issue, though, is long-term, how could we keep those or sustain those positions? So we have a lot to talk about over the next couple of months with that regard. So that's what I'm thinking right now, anyway.
Sorry about that, Anna. Holly, back to you now. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Yes. Having been one of the students that would run away from George from the study hall when we were downtown, I know how they ran away with them. And Charlie Nelson. So I am part of the evolution of the study hall, because there were kids, some of us wanted them, some of us didn't want them. I currently teach a study hall for students in my school right now in high school, 7-12. I teach 3 sections of it, and it's a highly organized skills class. So it's not just about, hey, sit down, get on your phone and talk to people or take a nap. There's actual, and I don't know, when I was at Red Wing, we did the same thing. And I don't know if that's continued, with you, George, but there is definitely a need for that. So I'm glad that you brought that up as something that's an option for kids, and really, really important, regardless of the track they're on, if it's college, if it's 2-year, if it's they're working right now and they work every single night and they need that hour in class to get their schoolwork done. There's a variety of reasons kids need that time during the day. Some just need to process. It's just too much. And so they don't have Randy's to run to like we did. So that's the whole part of it. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And for the sake of what I'm hearing you say, George, it really sounds to me like common sense. We have money coming in and we can safely cut probably 2 million, 2.1 million without causing the most egregious problems. Even though I heard you say loud and clear, it's been stressful. And I've heard community members who are extremely stressed by this right now. Like, who's getting cut? When are they going to get cut? Who's going to know? How are they going to know? What is the timeline on this for people? And I think it's our responsibility to kind of shore this up and move it forward. And there are still a lot of questions even saying that. But hearing from Jackie, hearing from you, George, hearing from Karsten, I would like to recommend that we just go with the 2.2, not to vote tonight, because I know we're not in a voting position, but I would really like us to just focus in on that and move that forward so we can give people a peace of mind about where we're headed, knowing that we're getting money from the state and the federal government. If we weren't, that would be a whole different ballgame. But knowing that we are, it's common sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Jackie?
I was gonna comment on prep time to Anna's question, but I think it got answered after I put my name in the queue.
Arlen?
Mute button's hard to find again. First, when we look at a $2 million cut, I'm looking at a little bit differently. I'm looking at a cut of $1 million worth of COVID expenditures next year, regardless of what we're doing. And then we're looking at a $2 million cut as we're talking is really a $1 million cut. Because I think, in my mind, if COVID extra staffing requirements aren't needed next year, there's $1 million that we cut out of our budget just because of what we added to our budget to function. So I'm just putting that in perspective. Secondly, as far as the high school schedule goes, one of the advantages of the block schedule, the 8-period day, is, as George said, is that gives you a potential for 16 different options over the year, or unless they're a 1-year course. 7-period day cuts you down to 14. 6-period cuts you down to 12, and that's really way too low if you do a semester 6-period day. Another option, and I don't know if anybody can, maybe George can answer that after I'm done here. What is the cost if we were go to a 6-period day with trimesters rather than semesters? Then you're back to the 18 options for the year. That was talked about last year and other time, and current board, new board members, I don't think we're in on that conversation, but that is an option to look at. I don't know how it can function totally. And then a further observation, I believe, I'm not even sure I think we have at least 4 board members that are past Red Wing school attendees. And I think every one of us were a product of a 7-period day. I know I was, I'm quite sure, I know Jim was at least part of the time. And so 7-period days is very common in schools around us. I've often wondered if our block system drove students away from our district. So I'm on board with a 7-period day or possibly a trimester 6-period day if it's cost effective. But thank you.
Do you have anything to add to?
Do you want me to just, okay, yeah, we did look at trimesters last year when we were doing that schedule committee, and there are some benefits to a trimester, but I guess if we were to do that, I would definitely want, I mean, that might lead to a bigger conversation just in general with probably not just our school building, but the district. And, we'd have to consult everybody on that one. And then I think our community as well. So before I would want to jump to a trimester, I would want to make sure that was something we all kind of felt okay doing. But there are, as Arlen pointed out, there are benefits to a trimester because you do gain back some of that lost elective slot that you might get, that you would get in like an 8-period day. So.
And if I could add to what George said, I think the actual cost difference between a 6-period semester and a 6-period trimester, I think it's the same cost because a teacher would still teach 5 of 6 regardless of how many grading periods we have. The real impact though would be like what George said, that, do we have the core classes teaching all year? If that's the case, then would an art class or a music class only be a semester instead of a half a year? It'd be more of the impact on student learning.
I'll just again, just to kind of piggyback off of that, that was kind of why we did not go in the trimester direction, was because of some of the issues surrounding, well, what's a full year class? What's just a 2 trimester class? What's just a 1 trimester class? You know, there's a larger discussion there, probably would need more time to kind of evaluate. But something not necessarily we don't want to just, you know, put on the back burner. We can certainly consider it.
Jim, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question before I add to my comments. How many people does the high school building district, everybody up there on a given day are in school when we have everybody in school? 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,000?
If we were to have, so 712, if we were to have everybody here, it would be just under 1,200.
That includes staff?
No.
So
It would be over 1,200 then.
So 1,300 probably with community ed, district office, staff, custodians. Okay.
Yep.
I'll add that. Thank you. And I'll just say, I excelled in study hall. That was my time to shine. I loved study hall because it gave me time to do my work. So I like the idea, even though I'm older, but I like the idea. And I happened to be around when they formed the resource officer at the school. Back then, I think you had 9 through 12, more kids in school. And the thought process back then was, it's a little town, it's a little city. You need to have something, and you just kind of alluded to that with 12 to 1,300 people in a building at a given time. So, thank you.
Other comments about the proposed reductions and additions?
I just got one more. I had one more. I agree with Arlen on the $1,000 or the $1 million COVID cuts on top of that. So I like that rationale that he brought up there.
Jennifer.
I would just say that I agree with what Holly said. After this discussion, I am leaning toward the 2.2. That's kind of where I was before, but I was open to going to 3. After our discussion, I feel much better about the 2.2.
I mean, nobody likes to talk about budget cuts, right? And I can totally understand the angst that you talked about, Holly. It definitely, I'm sure, is weighing on many, many minds, including all of ours here today. But these are real cuts, and these are real people behind these positions and these members. So this is not a delightful, fun conversation to have, but I think it's really important to make a decision that is going to be responsible and right sizing, and also keeping in mind, down the road that there will be some more cuts that we're going to have to do, probably regardless of what scenario is voted upon. But I do think and appreciate all this conversation is helpful in honing us into a decision. The administration and staff have worked very diligently, as you can see with all the preparation here before us, how much they've done to prepare us and bring forth materials that we can make a good decision. And so I very much appreciate the administration's work, and Jackie and Karsten. I know this is probably not how you want to be spending your days, but thank you for all of that work. It sounds like we're coming close to a consensus. We're not voting on this tonight. This will be on the agenda for April 5th, and where we will vote at that time. And so, keep these pieces of information handy, because you can refer back to them. And I know that the administration are happy to be available to any of you to answer questions as we mull this over in the next 2 weeks. I think that's important to keep that dialogue open and answering your questions and concerns. So that's okay to do and ask and email. That's completely fine. Are there other questions, concerns, things that are brought up to you that you'd like to discuss this evening in terms of budgets, reductions, additions? All right, well, we've slotted till 8 o'clock. We've got 15 minutes. Is there any other board-related topics on our agenda is 2.5? So anything else that we'd like to discuss this evening before we adjourn?
Yeah, if so, we just have to make sure that it's budget related,
Correct. It has to be.
related to one of these items.
I'll just say it's a good discussion tonight, and I don't want to take off. I see Anna's in the queue. I'll be quiet then.
It's okay.
I just want to take off, get away from what we're doing here on some other topics that we're not prepared to talk about. So I think I'm comfortable ending this shortly because we were talking about this topic that nobody really wanted to talk about, but we needed to talk about.
Yeah. So when we look at that, the 2.2 scenario, the total is actually 2.4618. But you were talking, Karsten, about how like not everything cuts evenly, or this, it might not actually be this, because all of us are kind of at a consensus of like between 2.2 and 3. That number to me seems like, well, that's kind of between 2.2 and 3, but is that 2.46 accurate, or do you think it would be less than that? Like, can you just talk about more about what that means of that sort of nebulous things not cutting evenly kind of thing?
Nebulous is the right term to use because it's never exact because there's so many moving pieces. I think I can best answer that with an example. Suppose that we have slotted 200 kids for second grade, and we end up with 230 kids, in that grade. Then we're going to need to add a teacher, at least one teacher to provide the adequate class sizes. And so, when you factor that into budget reductions, there obviously would be extra revenue, but then there'd also be an extra cost. And that's true like for the high school teaching positions. It's true for, a lot of different areas. It's just a lot of moving targets. Even the estimates that we have for the cost of the teaching position, really that's just an estimate because some don't earn that much and others earn more. We also have some of the items here are through attrition. And so we might save all of it before the fiscal year starts, if they look for other jobs this spring, or maybe one or two of the positions are in the fall. But usually we have turnover there. So it's just a matter of when people leave. So those are just some examples of where it is. My assumption, if we approve this list, is that we would be somewhere between 2.2 and 2.4 million when all is said and done. But even with that, we always look for cost savings. So if we can save another bus route and still keep and move back to a 1 mile radius for elementary kids, then you got to do it. That's all there is to it. So we're constantly looking for those savings.
Great question, because I had that same thought, like, it is a moving number for sure, but as close to that target as possible.
And that's why, Jim has suggested in the past, cut more than what your target is, because I think we all realize that we don't know all the factors now.
Could we also say that from the admin's point that every department is affected by these right sizing? I really, really encourage all of you to use the term right sizing on the 2.2 side of things, because it really does reflect the 6% that Jackie showed you on that enrollment form, where we've gone in FTE and where we've gone in students. But also just to really, really reiterate that every K-12 is being affected. So from English to social studies to playground to everything. So
It's definitely right sizing, but I'm confident that after we do the right sizing, we'll still have a higher quality program than we've ever had.
Yeah.
And I'm really convinced that. And I'm not just saying it, I really believe it. So I think we're in the right direction. We just have to right size so that we can address some of the budget issues.
All right, I just want you all to know that unfortunately I am going to be out on April 5th. I had made plans, of course, and I was going to be at my destination by 1 o'clock in the day, which would allow me to call in. And to no fault of my own, my flight has changed and I land at 5:59 p.m., which makes it basically impossible to walk through an airport and try to get on this meeting. I feel good that I think our board has come to a pretty close consensus, if not unanimous consensus, so I feel good about that. I've asked Vice Chair Bryant to step in for me while I will be out. But I am 100% available on that day or any other day. And so if there are concerns or questions that come up, I will always be available. But unfortunately, I won't be here on April 5th. All right. With that, I will look for adjournment.
So moved. Oh, Anna, Holly seconds.
Moved by Anna, Holly, seconded. Any, we don't need discussion. Mr. Bryant,
Aye.
Ms. Buck,
Aye.
Mr. Derricks,
Aye.
Ms. Ostendorf,
Aye.
Ms. Tower,
Aye.
Ms. Tift.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are adjourned at 7:51. Thank you everyone for being here.
Good night, everybody. See you on the 5th.
Technology worked great,
Yeah,
so
good.
Good night.
that, thank
I'll
you.
pass that
Charlie.
message on to Charlie.
Yes. That was-
Other than
I
my.
love that. We're